What do we expect for Latin America in 2020? 2020 is likely to be a year of two halves for Latin America. The COVID-19 impact obviously is there for most economies. However, the differences in GDP growth are so significant between nations that it's important to understand why. The economies that will be most severely impacted are Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, and also, to a certain extent, Ecuador. If we look at why Venezuela and Argentina will be more severely hit, is fundamentally because they already came from a very, very weak environment in 2019, already in recession, already with massive fiscal and trade deficits, adding to absolutely extractive and destructive monetary policy. So all those things add to the COVID-19 effect to make the fall in 2020 GDP in Venezuela about 15%, in the case of Argentina about 5%. In the case of Mexico, very similar situation. Mexico saw already in 2019 very, very poor growth, actually no growth whatsoever, and decoupling from the growth of the region and the United States. Very aggressive interventionist policies, and right now adds to all of that the collapse in oil prices, the fall in export revenues, and the impact of COVID-19 in the economy. As such, Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela, and Brazil, which is impacted not so much because Mexico is expected to fall about 12%, Argentina about 5.5%, and Venezuela about 15%. Brazil about 6 to 7%, which is less than the average of the Eurozone. However, it is also higher than the average of Latin America. In the case of Brazil, the impact is obviously from mining, fall in commodity prices, plus fall in export revenues. This overall picture is quite different, interestingly, in economies like Chile, Colombia, and Bolivia or Peru. Economies in which what we have seen is that the countries have been extremely prudent, or at least tried to be very prudent about fiscal and trade deficits. They've been very, very prudent about monetary policy, which has been very important, keeping reserves strong. And they were already preparing themselves for a weak environment for commodities. So on one side, we have the most leverage to the commodity cycle and the most leverage to the weakness of the dollar and the exposure to imbalances. And on the other, the ones that have been slightly more prudent or at least a little bit more prepared. And the difference in fall for 2020 is massive. We're talking about twice or three times less than some of the economies that we were talking before. So we're expecting in Chile an economy to fall about 2%, Colombia about 3%, and Peru about 2.5%, 3%. So overall, a very interesting picture because we come out of COVID-19 and its impact with the divergence between economies being a lot bigger, and the challenges of those that we started talking about at the beginning, much larger. Therefore, the recovery is likely to be smaller and, more importantly, weaker. So looking at Latin America, we need to look very, very specifically to each of the countries and look at those elements that already made the economy either relatively strong or relatively weak in 2019 in order to understand how the recovery will be. Thank you very much.